And welcome back to the Book and Life podcast. Today we're going to have a brand new book guest on. Whether they're an author, an editor, a producer, you'll never quite know, so you're in for one hell of a ride. But today I just have to do the adverts and then I'll get us straight into that most important conversation. And as we do every week, I'm going to read The Shadow, which is part of the Time Guardian series, and this is book 4 from Marianne Curley. The battle is over, the war is won. The prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan, struggling to cope with tragic loss. At odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping in shadows and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess Athena's death, Giselle swears revenge, to vilify the Immortals' plan for world domination. But Giselle hadn't planned on love, and that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart, or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the Guard and the Order battle through the past and into an impossible future, darkness lurks round every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend or foe who stands in the shadow? And just a reminder that The Price of Freedom by Rosemary Rowan, is being donated to the Ukraine refugee crisis. And here's the blurb for her book. It's one of her Roman British crime series, which was written under her maiden name. All editions can be found online where all books are sold, even her agents donating her commission. Sorry, I don't have the blurb for that, but that's what she's doing. And now, without further ado, let's get you to the guests. So, you guys, I told you this was going to be one worth checking out. I promised you all a great historical writer. She could be the next Jean Pline, or she could be, even better, she could be a Nancy Revel. You're going to have to listen to find out a little bit more, and I promise you it is more than worth it. So, without further ado, let's introduce Christine Wells.
Hi, Crystal. Pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, welcome to the Book of Life podcast, where we are silly and have fun, and it's just, interesting. So could you tell us a little bit about One Woman's War and your other book?
Yeah, of course. One Woman's War is my most recent release, and it's got a little subtitle called A Novel of the Real Miss Moneypenny. So, as you can probably work out, it's set during World War II, and it's about the real woman who was secretary to James Bond creator Ian Fleming during World War II when they worked at British Naval Intelligence. So a lot of you probably know, but Ian Fleming was the right-hand man to the Director of Naval Intelligence, Rear Admiral John Godfrey, and Ian Fleming's job was to really coordinate massive intelligence operations, to come up with ideas for them, to resource them, to get approvals. So he was running between agencies and doing all of that. Paddy Bennett, I came across her quite by accident. I've always been interested in spies. My father took my brother and me to our first James Bond movie when I was 7. It was a bit of a funny story because we had been going, he'd been working in Sydney. We live in Brisbane, which is a plane flight away, just a short plane flight away. And my mother took my brother and me down to visit him while he was working, and then we had a family holiday together. So Mum had us for about a week on her own, and once Dad was finished work, she said, "Okay, they're yours. I'm going shopping." And And so instead of taking us to a museum or something educational that she expected him to do, he took us to see For Your Eyes Only. And yes, I was quite young, but I was enthralled. So I've been a bit of a James Bond fan ever since. And I was reading biographies about Ian Fleming and reading about the women in his life who were in the main very intelligent and witty women. I mean, he married Anne Fleming eventually, and I came across Patty Bennett and found out that not only had she been a secretary to him during the war, but she also was involved in Operation Mincemeat. So a lot of people know about Operation Mincemeat now because of the recent movie. And I thought, and she was such a redoubtable character. You know, she said she was half Irish and half Yorkshire, so the battle was terrific. And she's just quite a redoubtable woman. She was very young at the time, so I decided to write One Woman's War about her. And the other book we were going to talk about is Sisters of the Resistance, which is my previous novel. And that's about Catherine Dior, who was the sister of the famous fashion designer, and she draws two young women into the resistance movement during World War II in Paris. So it's told from the young women's point of view, mainly because there's not an awful lot of detail existing about what Catherine did, and I wanted to write about her because I felt she really needed to be known better, how brave she was, and you know what she contributed. But the scant detail meant that I didn't feel like I could make her a protagonist. So she's in it, and she draws these women into the movement, and it's told from their point of view. So Yvette, it becomes a model for Christian Dior, and Gabby, they're two sisters. Gabby is the concierge in the apartment building where Christian Dior lives, and where Catherine comes to stay when she visits Paris. She acted sometimes as a courier from the intelligence gathering unit in the south of France. She'd bring things with her to Paris to then smuggle out to the British. So she was, apparently there were comings and goings at night to and from Christian Dior's Paris apartment, and that's where Gabby, my principal character, gets involved.
Sounds amazing, and it's funny you say that because my partner's name is Ian Fleming, and he was named after the writer of James Bond.
Really?
So, yeah, I was holding that in my back pocket. So like, I was waiting for Russ to come on, and I was like, I'm going to tell her and see what she thinks. So yeah, every time he introduces himself, you know, everyone sort of kind of does that, and he's like, yes, it's spelled the same way, you know, and he just does that kind of, really?
Yes, it's a mantle of a name to carry, isn't it?
He carries it very well, actually.
Yeah.
He has a good laugh with it, and to be honest, he's got an incredible mind, and he's, for somebody who's as witty as him, you just don't expect a lot of the stories that you do get from him, because he's such a good storyteller. Whereas I'm the one that puts it on paper, he's the one that usually just comes up with them on the fly, and yeah, leaves a lot of moments. So yeah, but it's lovely to hear more of the British missions kind of coming out as well, because I grew up in a place where a lot of secret missions happened, and you know, we got taught it at school, but when you kind of came down to the mainland, people didn't know about these secret missions. So I think it's great that you're sort of bringing attention to them, and you're telling them in a fresher way. You're telling them in a way that people can connect to nowadays, and not just think of it as, oh, another dusty book that can sit on the shelf, you know, because it looks pretty. I think that's a really good thing, and I think we need, especially now with everything that's going on with Ukraine, and I think we kind of need to remind people that it wasn't as long ago as we would like to think. that we were all in that position, and that we just need to be a bit more aware of what's happening so that we don't end up back there.
Yes, absolutely. And I always marvel at the bravery of everyday people. So, uh, you see those stories coming out of Ukraine and just marveling at the bravery that you see. It's just, I mean, it's horrible that it has to be the way, but you do, I'm sure in years to come there'll be stories told about this era as well.
And I think that there's a lot of hero stories. I mean, there's some that we've obviously already heard about, but I think, the Prime Minister set the perfect example by not leaving and
Yes,
saying,
exactly.
I am going to stay and I'm going to fight with my people. And I admired his wife, who, it has to be terrifying for her, knowing what the Russians would do if they got their hands on her. And yet she stayed, and she still
Yes,
stays, and she walks with him, and she's proud of the fact that she's saying, I'm going to take a stand. I'm not going to let this just happen. And
yeah,
I admire her for that, because there's a lot of leaders that as soon as the country's, in trouble, they flee, and that's the end. And I think if we look at what's happened in Iraq over the last 2 years, that's kind of a perfect example of a leader who flees in the face of trouble, or at least our most recent sort of example that we have of that. So I love the idea that you've also taken a female perspective, because that's something that there's very few writers that do focus particularly on the women's side of history. I think people are so used to listening to the stories of the men that it's almost kind of nice when you do get a female perspective. And I grew up on Catherine Cookson, where it was a bit of a mixed bag, because you just didn't know with her what you were getting till you sort of like 50 pages in, and then you're like, okay, I have no idea what this story's about, but I'm going to keep going anyway.
right. Yeah,
She does
yeah. I
have that
think
addictive quality about her.
well, the fiction is a good avenue to explore women's stories because there's
Yeah,
so little detail. I mean, with Patty, she's not even mentioned in a book about Room 39 where she worked. She's not mentioned in a lot of the books about Operation Mincemeat. So
yeah.
just, I had to piece together what she had actually done. And there's a bit of contention about who wrote these letters and, all of this sort of detail.
It
So,
wouldn't surprise me if women actually had a bigger role behind the scenes during World War II than people realise.
well,
I
I think
think,
so. Yeah, absolutely.
and I think it. I know from the Shetland side of things that the Shetland women were really instrumental in keeping that community going and alive, because their men were taking whatever boat they had and were going over to Norway and going to Finland and Denmark, and they were rescuing whoever they could while also dropping spies there. And you know, women are essentially forgotten about in regards to that mission, because they were the ones that were taking rowing boats out into the North Sea to fish, to feed the families that were left behind. If a woman was widowed, for instance, the female community would just rally round her. And there was so many that were widowed so quickly. And the men didn't just go out to do those particular missions. They used to go out on scouting missions to actually retrieve people from the ocean that had, the Germans were great for sinking boats and then leaving the crew to drown. And, the Shetlanders would risk their lives going out at night to see if they could rescue ones. Because they had this great belief about the ocean and about just following, their heart and going with that flow. And the laws of the ocean, I think, bounds all fishermen and all people of the sea, and that was that's what they held on to in such a time of uncertainty and crisis. And the women held on to it because they had to. They had to hold on to it for their men's sake. And I think it's pretty incredible when you think about it.
Yes, and when you think of it as a world war, these sort of stories are everywhere.
Yeah.
And, recently I discovered about the Danish resistance, which I had never come across before. There are so many stories to tell. I think you could spend a lifetime.
Yeah, and I only recently, I watched, I can't remember what it was called now, but they did a show in America about the royal family of Norway and how they got ships
Atlantic crossing.
Yeah, the Atlantic crossing. And to me that was important because people always, everyone knows the British royal family. I mean, you can't really ask a single person who doesn't. But there is other royal families. And there's other royal lines. They're just a lot quieter about their existence than the British are. And to me it was important because Shetland was originally Norwegian/Danish.
Yes.
And, to us, we still have that connection to them that's really strong. So it was good to see, it felt like a little bit of our history because I knew the men that had come from Shetland to help them escape, to make sure that boat got out and that they got to the States, and they did. They risked so many of the men risked their lives that day for just that one reason. And the royal family originally actually wanted to go to the Shetlands because they thought it would be safe, because they thought, well, nobody knows where this place is on a map, so how are they going to know where we are? And I thought, well, that's brave for one, because Shetland didn't have the same amenities as everybody else at that point. They were a little behind and it was kind of a bit of a forgotten community. But I just thought, wow, the first place they thought of was our islands, our sort of little islands, and it was very amazing. And Shetland was one of the more unscathed islands in the World War because they got bombed once and they only managed to kill a rabbit. They came and they dropped this muckle great big bomb in a field. I don't know what they were thinking they were going to hit. And all they got was a rabbit. They found the rabbit, that's how they know. And we had a German boat go down in the Lerwick Harbour, and they rescued the German, and he was so grateful to be given they gave him a house, an empty house they had, and they did it up for him, and he lived in relative comfort. The islanders didn't trust him. They kept very close watch on him, but he had relative freedom because he wasn't kept in a camp. He wasn't kept in chains or anything like that. He was allowed to live among them. But they all reminded him, I think, probably periodically, if I know Shetlanders, that they knew what he was and what he'd done, and that he had to live within a set rules. And it's funny because there's descendants of that playing guy, the fighter pilot, who lives in Shetland now, distant relatives of him, who went and lived on the islands because they went there to visit and they fell in love with the place and they saw where he'd stayed and how well he'd been taken care of, and I think that was an amazing experience for them, that they decided to call Shetland home.
Well, he was very lucky because I think there was a bit of vigilante behaviour elsewhere when they found downed pilots.
Yeah, there was, and I always laugh because my grandfather told me about this Australian pilot that had come up to Shetland to run this particular set of mission, and he was so cold. Bless him, he couldn't get warm, and he had like 3 of these woolly jumpers on, and he looked a bit like, muscle man. He just couldn't move because he had to wear so many layers so he wouldn't get colder.
That'd be me.
Yeah, and as soon as he could get inside for a hot cup of tea and a drink and sit by the fire, he was there, So it always amused my grandfather when he met people from other countries, because either they did really well in the Shetlands and they thought it was beautiful, or they were a bit like him and sort of could never get warm again.
Miserable.
I bet he was glad to get back to your weather. He must have been like, hallelujah.
Well, there are downsides to our weather too. It gets very hot here. But, yeah.
Well, you guys are in the middle of your summer, aren't you?
We are supposedly going towards summer, but it's been quite cold here for us. So
okay.
I haven't been in the swimming pool yet. That might give you an idea. It just hasn't been warm enough to swim. So we had a real cold snap that came through, and it was snowing down south, and so but just this week we're into the 30 degrees Celsius sort of day.
That's
so
good,
we'll be able to swim soon.
Well, here, honestly, it's like monsoon rain we've got. So, yeah. Normally, Scotland's pretty good with the rain because we get it all the time. It's like all the time. But this kind of rain has just been. It's just been non-stop for the last sort of week. And there's parts that's flooding and stuff, and most Scottish people won't build on a floodplain, so we're pretty good for things like that. But yeah, you're just driving through tons of water, and there's water all over the roads, and yeah, it's been weird. It's probably the wettest I've seen November for us for a very, very long time.
Yeah, we had a very wet, the past year was very wet, and we had flooding, and unfortunately Australians are not so good about not building on floodplains, so there are houses by the river that just get inundated quite regularly now, when we used to say, we only get flooded once in 100 years, and then it's been twice or 3 times in the last 10 years. So the people, I can't believe people just they claim on insurance, renovate, and still stay where they are, and then they get flooded.
Yeah, that never made sense to me either, because in England they're not great for not building on floodplains either, and I just think, yes, it's a beautiful spot, but could you not have built it on a hill? It's not like England doesn't have hills, because they have a lot of hills. But, you're just like, could you not have just gone 50 yards up, a little bit higher,
Yeah, we seem to have a lot of developers who just buy this cheap land, and it's cheap because it's a floodplain, and then they sell the houses to immigrants who aren't aware and don't do the searches that they need to do, and then they get inundated. But I live in Queensland, and there's a style of house that's a Queenslander. So traditionally they were built on stumps, and so the water would just rush through underneath and you'd be fine. But now people raise them and build in underneath, and so it's become
defeats the purpose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that in Florida, where they will build on these gigantic stilts almost. And then I think, I wouldn't want to be up that high with the winds they get, I just think, so it's kind of for them, I feel it's worse, because it's either hurricane season or it's like tropical storm season.
Yes.
And I think, would like to be there, because, we were flying to LA in 2016. Our flights were on schedule, but the lassie who'd flown from Glasgow with us to Philly, she was almost in tears because all her flights were delayed because there was a tropical storm had hit,
Yeah.
and she had no idea how she was getting to Florida. And
No.
I thought, oh, and I thought, because we had the wildfires when we were out, and I thought that was scary enough, but I couldn't imagine sort of being stuck and thinking, okay, I can't get to the state I need to get to. It must be crazy. It must be uncomfortable at times.
Domestic travel in the United States is not a joke. I'll
No.
try to limit that if I can. If I'm over there, I'll try to go straight to the place I want to be in. But
Yeah. I flew over the Rockies once, and I just thought, I don't fancy doing that again. Because I think we were halfway to LA. My husband was trying to sleep, and then we had like 6 pockets of air back to back. So it was like pop, pop, poof, pop, pop, poof. I was like, okay, this is not good. Especially like, because you're coming over the top of the mountains, and you're thinking,
yeah.
please don't hit the mountain. But that's like, because the Shetlander in me, even though I know I'm on a big plane, I still think I'm on a propeller plane. One of those tiny little things. So I still almost imagine this little plane trying to like skimmy through the air to get to where it's going. And obviously that's not the case. But yeah, I've survived quite a lot of bumpy landings. Any Shetlander has, because our airport is actually built in the ocean.
Right. Oh.
So there's 50 meters out one way and 50 meters out the other way. So if the pilot cuts it too fine, he's in the water one end. And if he brakes too soon, he's in the water at the other end.
No.
And if he's really unlucky, he can get blown sideways off. Because there's nothing to stop them. So yeah, and then, because Shetland has no trees, so when the wind really rolls through, it rolls through. And you think, gee, am I about to lose the house? Kind of idea. So yeah, because we've been up fairly recently, and they had 110-mile-an-hour winds. And I thought, yeah, we're going to lose something tonight. And it's weird because all this sort of garden furniture was sort of rolling down the hill. And then there was this thing on Facebook going, right, I'm the owner of such and such, and this is the owner of such and such, and this is the owner.
Yes. We have that on the river where all the pontoons come loose during the floods and boats, and we had a restaurant that was sort of pontoon, and it sort of broke free and floated down the river, and yes. I think
that must have been hard to recover, though.
Oh, I think it was just so badly damaged they had to rebuild. But I think after the second time it happened, there is no restaurant there anymore.
I don't blame it. I think if you have lived by the ocean, everyone has that natural, instant, respect for it, because you're kind of like, yeah, I know what it can do. I'm just going to stay safely over here.
Yes.
It's that self-preservation part of you kicks in. So
that's right. And if you live in a place, you're used to whatever natural
disasters
there are. Yeah.
And nowadays the natural disasters are so much more often that it's harder for us to ignore. It's harder for us to kind of go, oh, okay, this doesn't happen very often, when actually, in reality, it does. And we're all just sort of coming to terms with it now, I think. So, when you came to write your books, was there like a sort of thing that said, I have to write in this genre, or I have to write this topic? What was the inspiration that really got you going?
I think that I just felt really comfortable in the historical fiction genre, and it's what I read a lot of, and although I do read mystery and psychological thrillers too, so that's a separate issue, but I think my voice is fairly well suited to historical fiction, although I would say I probably write a little more compactly, or I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm not the sort of writer who will write pages of description.
No.
You know, some writers do beautiful, beautiful description of the place and all of that. I'm more of a get up and go and let's tell the story sort of thing. And then I do a lot of research, but I weave it in so that it's not, so that
Like it's
hopefully,
being dumped on you.
yes, and hopefully the reader feels like they're there. But I'm
Yeah.
not instructing you or lecturing you or anything like that. It's just, it's all about the story and what I can weave in from the historical research.
And you focus on the pace of it. I think that's what kind of comes through in your writing, is that you can tell just from, even if you go on to Amazon and you take a sample, you can normally tell from that what the pace of somebody's writing will be like.
Yes.
And you can kind of fall in love with it from there. And if it's a really good book, you will go and buy it. And so sometimes if I have somebody on and I've not read them before, I might go and I'll take a nosy at a sample. And I can tell from that, if somebody's a describer or if they're a pacer or if they have, what skills that they like to apply. And then that helps me when I do this, because it gives me an idea of whether people want to tell lots of stories or whether they're more focused on sort of the pace of what the podcast will sound like. And it's also my job to get everybody out their head, so I kind of come up with sort of really random stories from my own experiences. And then I always have a 5-minute chat too, so just everyone kind of gets that nice relaxed space in a way.
Oh.
So yeah, I noticed that about yours. Yours is a very pace-driven novel, and I think that's really well done. And I look forward to reviewing your work in more detail in the future.
Oh, thanks very much, Crystal. I think perhaps it's a fairly fast pace for historical fiction.
Yeah.
But in some areas, the One Woman's War has been touted as a spy thriller, and it's not a spy thriller. It's really historical fiction. So there are spies in it, but if you're looking for a twisty-turny spy thriller, that is not that book. It's firmly in the historical fiction camp, and it's about spies, but it's not.
I think the characters who are in it maybe confuses the reader in some regards, because they've kind of got a preset idea in their head almost of what it would be. And that's maybe where a lot of them are thinking, oh, no, it's got to be a spy thriller, because they've got preconceived notions on certain things.
I think the cover contributes to that too. I think the cover can be
Bit
very
spyish. Yeah.
Yes. So had it been a different cover, it might have. But I think they were angling for Bond fans.
They were doing two things with one stone. Yeah, killing two birds with one stone. Yeah. So, what are you reading? Like, have you had a book recently that you could say, oh, this has really stuck with me?
Yes. Well, I love the Mick Herron Slow Horses series. Have you heard of
I've
this?
heard of them, but I haven't gotten them because it's kind of difficult to get Australian books over here sometimes.
Well, actually, it's British. Yeah, he's British. So,
okay. So here was me thinking it was Australian.
No, it's about all the misfits from MI5. So all the rejects go to this particular place that is called Slough House, which is, I don't think it's actually in Slough, but so their nickname is the Slow Horses.
That's just something that happens here. People will say that they live in a certain area, and it's not that area. It's like 50 miles down the road. It's just the only closest thing to it.
Right.
You learn that living in Scotland, especially if somebody says, I stay outside Edinburgh. Yeah, I always ask for the name of the street, because I never believe anybody when they say that. Because I've had friends that say, I'm 10 minutes from the city. 45 minutes later, we're then finding them. It's like, that thought you said you were 10 minutes from this,
Yeah,
yeah.
10 minutes from pretty much everywhere, or 15 minutes. That's what people say in my town, and it never is. And the
No.
the roads are terrible. The traffic's terrible. Well, not as bad as Sydney, but
I've heard things about Sydney traffic, I must admit.
Oh no, I wouldn't want to drive in Sydney traffic. I think I'd have to give up my car if I lived in Sydney.
It's funny you say that, because I kind of compare it to Los Angeles. It cannot be worse than Los Angeles, I promise you.
No, everybody drives in Los Angeles, don't they? It's like public transport doesn't exist.
It does, it's just incredibly difficult to find.
Yeah, it's a difficult to exist.
And I also, the thing that scared us was we were on the freeway, as they call it there, and there was ends of cars missing. People driving without doors.
Oh gosh.
And I'm thinking, that can't be safe. Like, this woman had lost the entire rear end of her car, and there's just this big black bin bag she had over the end.
Oh no! Yeah.
And I thought, oh, honey, yeah. Well, no, because see, they don't have MOTs. Like, you know how in Britain we have MOTs, which basically means that the car is safe to be on the road.
Yes.
And I believe you guys have something similar to that.
Yes.
But in Los Angeles, they don't. The only thing they have to do is do a smoke test. So to me, I'm just like, this seems a bit dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's all the roads are very loud because everybody uses their horns. Like, I've never heard so many car horns in my life as that 10 days that we were in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I noticed that in San Francisco too.
Yeah.
I went to a conference there and heard some of the recordings afterwards of the workshops, and every so often there's a blaring horn or there's a police siren.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, San Francisco is a lot like Los Angeles. It's just not got the blazing heat and the large poverty level, I suppose. But yeah, that was something that we noticed. It was just the attitudes as well was completely different from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. LA was far more laid back than Philly was. Philly seemed a little bit more high strung compared to what we thought. City of Brotherly Love, they're going to be laid back, they weren't, and that really surprised us. And it's made me more of a West Coast fan.
Right.
But now that I've done Los Angeles, so I only have a couple of places in America I want to go now, but Australia is the big one on my list that I want to get done. To come over and sort of
come and visit.
Yeah, it's my dream. Yeah. Well, yeah, I fancy kind of seeing it for myself, and I've had a lot of my Shetland friends from school have actually emigrated, so it would be very bizarre for me to sort of be out there, because I bet I'll walk down the street and meet like all of them in one sort of walk or something, and I'll be like, am I at school here or something,
Where about today?
I have 5 in Sydney and 8 in where you are, actually, Melbourne area. Melbourne and Brisbane. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
so. It would be hard to avoid them all, I think. But Shetlanders do that. We get everywhere. It's a bit like German measles, It's always the running joke, any Shetlander can go anywhere in the world and they're guaranteed to meet another Shetlander.
Well, it feels like that with the Aussies too. I was on the Isle of Wight researching a book and I was lost. I had a massive map and it was very windy, and I was trying to walk from the coast near Ventnor up to Appuldurcombe.
Yeah.
And my B&B lady had has told me the way to go, but I have no sense of direction. And so that sort of went in one ear and out the other, and there was no mobile reception there, so
Nope.
I couldn't do the Google Maps thing, which had got me around everywhere else. And so I asked the first person I came across, and guess where the first person I came across was from? Australia.
Australia.
I didn't know. And then my taxi driver was from Wagga Wagga, or
Oh,
as
wow.
Wagga, as we call it in Australia too. So yes, quite a few expats there, but Australians, I guess,
Yeah, and
yeah,
we have
we're
quite a
more like
few.
them and measles. So I'm sure the English are sick of us because we've
I love
invaded.
it. I do because I had a family who they were Shetlanders originally. They emigrated to Australia and then they emigrated back. But they left the kids in Australia and they just came
Right.
back as a couple because the
Yeah.
kids were fully grown. And it it's you can tell when somebody's just come back from a hot country in Shetland because they're you just see the nose and the eyes and that's it. Like they're just covered up to like the hilt. Or you see the girls who's gotten the nice tans because they've been away in Spain and then they're like shivering trying to get into the nightclub, and we have one
They can't
nightclub.
show their tans because they're too cold.
They are, yeah. And I mean, I weigh less than 60 kilos, so I always felt the cold.
Mm.
Um, so trying to dress like other girls my age was almost torture because I would put the miniskirt on. But anywhere you would go with a miniskirt, you had to walk with your hands on either side so you could hold it down because the wind was just awful. And then we discovered tights, the black tights that look like leggings,
Mm.
before the mainland of Scotland had. So we were wearing those under our skirts way before they became popular again. And that was just because it was so cold.
Yes.
And I went to Greece and I remember looking at my mom and I was this beautiful toffee colour. And I looked at my mom and I went, this isn't going to last when I go home, is it? It's just going to vanish. But I actually stayed tan for up to a year and a half later.
Wow.
So I was walking around with this tan. And so I thought when I went back to LA, I would have the tan. The tan would come back. No, I
No.
bleached. I
Oh,
got
that's
whiter.
very sad. Well, in Australia, we're all vitamin D deficient because we've been told to stay out of the sun because skin cancer is a huge
Yeah.
thing here. So we're all staying out of the sun and we're not getting enough vitamin D. So I actually take vitamin D tablets every day,
I
which
do
is
that too. I
ironic.
don't have a choice. Yeah.
No, well, where you
Um,
live, I'm sure, but here it's so
Because
sunny.
it's so weird. Shetland has the lowest levels of vitamin D in the world.
Mm.
And you think during the summer in Shetland, the sun never sets. So you
Right.
get daylight from morning to night, like just all the time.
Mm.
And then I think it's like that for 90% in the summer. And then in the winter, you're lucky if the sun rises because the
Yeah.
weather's so awful. And yeah, we have to take vitamin tablet. We have to take this high dose of vitamin D because none of us can keep it.
Mm.
And it's especially, I think that's why a lot of Shetlanders have arthritis. And it hits women particularly a lot younger. And they say that it is tied to the vitamin D. And then, of course, I expected when I was in LA that would just not be a thing because sun all the time, you know? But yeah, there was a lot of my friends who worked in production companies and publishers that said they were actually vitamin D deficient because they wouldn't sit outside.
Yes.
I thought, to me, that was crazy because I was there and I was writing Dragon, my novel Dragon, which is sort of in processes of being signed, and I thought this is insane, you know, this is the best place to write because I could sit in the sun and I could be warm enough, but I had enough shade that I could see the computer. So I thought this was brilliant. And my husband tanned really well, and I didn't, so I was a bit envious. But I couldn't believe it, and I think a lot of us have listened to all the I always say the dreadful warnings from the doctors about don't do this or don't do that because you'll get whatever, and I think it's kind of made us all so scared of that we're ending up making things worse for ourselves because we're not doing the things that our body needs, particularly if we're from a certain sort of place in the world.
Mm.
And I think, I just think it's crazy. So I tend not to worry about things like that as much. I try to like go and enjoy it, mainly because I know I have to give it up and go back to somewhere that's dark and rainy and awful. But I think enjoy it while you have it, and appreciate it while you have it, because you never know how long you're going to get it for. So
Yeah, especially we're in for another rainy season, so I'm determined to enjoy the sunshine. It's a beautiful day here today, actually.
yeah,
Um,
you'll be able to sit outside and read a good book and have a nice cup of tea and just enjoy the
yeah,
day.
yeah. I've got another event, or an event to go to this afternoon. So, um, yeah. But in between, I'll be out in the garden, so that'll be
Yeah,
lovely.
that's the best, when you can just sort of be outside and somewhere peaceful and relaxed and just enjoy that world out there. I think I like the slower living style to a lot of the fast-paced New York, LA lifestyle. I that lifestyle is not for me. I like Netflix and a good cup of tea and the company of my husband, compared to going from nightclub to nightclub and all that kind of stuff. That to me is insanity. But I may be too old. I'm 33. I think I've gotten to that point where I'm like, ugh.
Well, you do all of that stuff in your late teens and twenties, and then you move on, don't you? Really,
Yeah, I
most
gave it three
people.
years. I did it from when I was like 16 to like I was 20.
Yeah.
Pushing
Yeah.
21, I think, was the last time I was in a nightclub. And I was just like, yeah, I'm done. I'm just like, no, no, I'm done. I've partied in major cities, and I'm just, yeah, it's the same everywhere you go. So I was quite, yeah, I was never a big partier, to be fair. Who do you, like, if you had infinite amount of time, who would you just sit and read and enjoy? You get one series and one author, but it can't be the same author for the series.
Right. Infinite time. I think the question sort of presupposes that it's somebody you don't normally have time for. So I think I would say I've always wanted to read Dickens's full works. Just yeah, I think I remember I read quite a few of them, but then I got to Pickwick Papers and I sort of floundered and I thought, oh, I don't
Yeah,
have time for this. So yeah, I think I'd like to go back and read him or Shakespeare. I'm greedy. I'll take a few. And I couldn't think of any series that I really don't have time for, but one that I stopped reading and that I would like to go back and rediscover is Lindsay Davis's Falco series set in
all
ancient
right.
Rome. He's a private investigator in ancient Rome, and just she's a great example of what I try to do with my books. Is that she's got that wonderful body of research behind her, and she clearly knows her stuff, and she knows exactly what it's like in ancient Rome. But they're great stories, and
Yeah.
she'll it feels almost contemporary in the way that she writes it. So
Oh,
yeah, and they're funny too. I always like a bit of humour in a book. So yeah.
I mean that's what you're describing is why I fell in love with Leslie Pierce. She did The Gypsy, and
Mm.
I just love that story because it really encapsulates a journey from England with this desperate hope for a better life, and and not really finding it. Realizing it's actually a bigger struggle, it's a harder struggle, and she has to make it worthwhile. And I thought that was so powerful in a way, and it's part of she's part of the reason I love her is I kind of went from Catherine to her. And it was a good transition because she was not overly descriptive. It didn't feel like she was breaking, certain taboos that we have in historical fiction writing. And I think that, to me, made it important and made it enjoyable. So, yeah, that's one I always sort of kind of recommend because she's not very well known as I thought she would have been. So, yeah, I always kind of say that to people, yeah.
I'll try her because I know the name and I've seen her books around, but I've never read those ones. So thank you for that. I always more books to add to the pile.
And last year I found Elizabeth Chadwick, and she did it was a Viking one, and I was so not sure about reading it because I am so panicky about my Viking my Viking culture and mythology, and I thought she's going to ruin it. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be good. And I read it and I was like, actually, no, she did it justice. She presented it like it was, having Norwegian people invading the UK and how that was for people and the resentment, but having that bond between women because women were women. And, they had to go through these awful experiences and had to figure things out. And I thought, I adore her for that. And she was one of my newer finds. And I do really like her. I think she did such an incredible job. She's not with us now. But yeah, I do really admire her. So have you tried anything in the crime range? Is there anybody that's sort of standing out to you this year in crime fiction?
Crime fiction, I like Jane Harper, who is an Australian author, but she is international.
I just finished doing her arc for her new novel that's coming out.
Right. Oh, okay. Lucky you.
I never read her before.
Right.
And I was just like, oh, you are... And I'm interviewing her in December, and I'm thinking, okay, this is really cool. I have no idea who this is. And somebody had said to me, you'll love her. She's an Australian Fiona Cummings.
Right.
And I thought, okay. And I did. I thought she did such a good job with Exiles, and she's converted me. I have found that I am not sticking to British crime writers as much. I am sort of dipping my toe outside the British Isles for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, she does some really amazing work, and I'm glad to see that series is kind of continuing on.
Well,
I think she did it good. But if you get a chance, Fiona Cummings and Hankar Nesser, who is the Swedish writer, he just broke into the British crime scene. He does an incredible series. I did his latest one as an arc review, and he really kind of takes a crime that this poor guy who's coming back from losing his wife suddenly, and he's trying to find himself as an inspector again. And it's that journey of, well, who am I now that she's gone? Can I even do this anymore? To that realization of life and what life actually means to him, and how it's changed and how everything's different. And I thought it was such an eye-opener because he does go through that motions of grief and love and loss, and then still being dog-determined to solve a case. I thought it was really well done. And he's breaking out, and here he's nicknamed the Swedish Godfather of crime.
Oh, right.
So, and he's got 5 books out right now. So, yeah, definitely worth a read, and you'll be ahead of the game before he hits Australia for sure.
I'll have to write all these books down. Thank you for that. Yeah, well, I was really pleased that my son is studying. He's in an honours English class, so they're doing
Oh,
different books from the rest of the year
yeah,
group, and they were studying The Dry, which is a Jane Harper's real breakout
novel,
debut
yeah.
novel, and he loved it. And it's so quintessentially Australian because it's about the drought and about the outback
Yeah.
and if you're into that sort of thing, and even if you're not, because I must admit I'm actually not. I'm not a big Aussie sort of reader,
Yeah.
but it's so well done, just written so well. And her other one, The Lost Man, I think that's her best. So if you want
Oh, I'll
to
have to I'll
look
have
for
to
that
look them up
one,
for that. Yeah.
yeah,
Cause
it's not part of that series. It's a
yeah.
standalone, but it's fabulous.
Cause I just got one. I just finished interviewing Sunny Dean, and she did a book which is it's very different. It's a very dark fantasy called Book Eaters.
Mm.
So the way that that story works is they have to eat the books to survive,
Oh no!
right? So they're eating books, but they're absorbing what they're reading through eating
Uh-huh.
it. And
Right.
then the twist is her son has to eat brains to survive. So like her entire world shifts again.
Oh.
Um, so that one's been a very unnervy read for me, but I'm enjoying it because it's so different. It's not something that I would have picked up, if you know what I mean. It's
Mm.
one that's caught me completely unawares, and I am, and it's not a long book either, so it's good. It's not like I'm in for a long haul. It's going to be an enjoyable fast read, I think. So
Mm.
yeah,
When you
but
said that, it reminded me of Diane Setterfield's The 13th Tale, which I loved.
yeah,
And she says to the young woman who's a bookworm and I think she's trying to write her biography, would you save a person or would you save the last copy of Jane Eyre or whatever that
yeah.
classic book that she loved was? And I think you can sort of hear readers everywhere going, "Save the book."
Save the book, save the book. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, yeah. That's an awful one, actually. Oh, I would hate to have to make that choice. So,
yeah.
is
I
there
mean,
is there an author, past, present, who's sort of influenced, inspired, and it made you excited about books? And you get an author for each one. So you get an author for influenced, an author for inspired, and an author for excited.
oh, okay. Influenced. I would have to admit that Georgette Heyer, who I read when I was about 12, 11 or 12, influenced me a lot. I started off, my first book was a bit of a Regency romance knockoff, so
Yeah.
it never
Oh,
saw the
we all
light of
have one
day.
of those.
So I loved her wit, and she was a meticulous researcher as well. So she probably influenced me quite a bit. Excited. I remember reading Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, and it just blew me away. I thought the writing was amazing, and the twist was terrific. And what she had to say about the economic situation at the time and the dynamic between husband and wife. It just that really excited me and almost revived my enthusiasm for books. And what was the other one? Inspired.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Gilbert, Big Magic.
Oh,
She,
okay.
yeah, it's a book for writers really, but
Yeah.
I just found her philosophy on how she had this mega success with a book that you eat, pray, love, uh,
Yeah.
but that she didn't let that define her or stop her from going on and doing completely different things,
Yeah.
because she has always been a writer. She knows that I mean, a lot of these things become phenomena, um, partly because of marketing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she said this, but this is what I think, that you can have many, many brilliant books that do not hit because they just didn't have the publishing dollars behind them. And
Yeah.
so, this was this phenomenon. But if she had let herself think, oh, I've got to replicate that, you could never replicate that.
No.
So her philosophy is that she just writes what she wants to write, and whatever success happens or doesn't happen, that's in the laps of the gods, basically. So
And it is very, very true, because
yeah,
anybody who's been an independent author at some point in their lives understands the pressure of that, because we have to do it ourselves. We have to go out
yeah,
and find interviews. We have to get papers to do, interviews and push us and promote us and all that kind of stuff. So it's, we have I think anyone who's independent has got a deep respect for marketing teams over the world. And then, when you get into a big publisher, you have to hope that they have a marketing budget for you, and that marketing budget's used correctly, and that you get a team that can get you placed in the right places for your particular style of book to make you a seller. And reading the markets is not easy. It is not easy. And I think a lot of the times marketing people get brought in and they're said, right, here, make this book into something big, and it's just not the right time for that book to be out in the market. And
yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's a bit sad. But it's true. And I think we're now consuming more books than what we used to. I think as a society, COVID has made people go, oh, I could take a book with me, and then if I get stuck in a queue, I've got something to read, or if I get stuck in the doctor's office, there's a book there to read, rather than picking up a magazine that maybe 50 people with different bugs and viruses has already used.
Yeah.
So I think in a society we're getting smarter, and I think what we're reading has changed as well, and that's just to do with society and changes in what tastes. We might get sick of fantasy for a while, so we'll go and we'll read historical. We might get sick of historical, we'll go read romance books. That's what makes the market so fickle, I think. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and very sadly, I was told that a lot of New York or US accounts are not taking as much World War II fiction
Yeah.
anymore. So then the question is, well, do I push forward into this negative space where Costco are saying no, we don't want those books, or do you pivot and say, well, my core story, I write about women who are largely undiscovered by history, and I can do that in any era.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a challenge to find new.
I would not give up with the US, because if you look at the track record, they've gotten Hidden Figures was big recently. You're seeing more movement in the World War II things, because people are curious about the war in Ukraine, and they're curious about, well, what's this going to mean for us if this happens? Because people are curious. We're all naturally curious, and we all want to know what could happen. And I think if we don't give up on that market, and there is publishers in the US, and there is sales of the books in the US. Are they bestseller sales? No. But you don't write this genre thinking you're going to be an instant bestseller. You write it because it's a story you're passionate about, and you want to tell that story. If you want a bestseller, you bust your ass in kids, or you go into romance, or you go into one of the markets that's known and has a supported track record for making people bestsellers. But I don't recommend that ever drive anybody when it comes to writing, because at the end of the day, it's about your stories that you're telling, and your stories are important to the world. Whether you're published by a publisher or whether you do it yourself. There will always be one reader out there, at least one reader out there that will want to read you and want to know your story.
Yeah, I guess that is true. Just depends. I mean, writing is my income. You know, it's
Yes,
my job. So I
same.
do have to consider what the market wants, what my publisher wants, because they do have a view. So on the one hand, yes, you do need to tell the stories you need to tell, but I do find that a new challenge can be very good for my creativity. And if someone
Yeah,
says, "Okay, we want, try a different era." I've written in Regency England, I've written in Georgian England,
yeah,
World War II France. I've done a sort of foray into Cold War. So
yeah.
it's not World War II that I'm stuck on. It's the
No, no,
current
I wasn't
world.
meaning that. No.
Yeah, yeah. So I do hear what you're saying, and I do believe that, if you're passionate about World War II and that is the story you want to tell, yeah, of course. But I do follow the market to an extent. I'm never going to go and write a fantasy novel just because fantasy novels are hot right now. But
Yeah.
yeah, within limits, I will find a story, and it's amazing. I actually went through 6 proposals recently, and
Wow.
yeah, to just get something that my editor and agent think is worthy. So, as a working writer, can you really hold on to your book of your heart when you've got to pivot 6 times?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the great thing for, I think, one of the things we get taught here in school, or university, because I'm at university now, is that you need to be able to sort of diversify, like you've done. And you need to be able to move within either a genre or between genres. And you need to be able to do that. And you need to be able to pivot and change with the times and change with how things are done. I mean, I know that better than anyone. I battled for years to make sports romance relevant, only to have my wrestling novels languish at the bottom of the pile. And
Mm.
now I have learned to write. I took time away, and I learned about writing different genres, about putting myself out there, trying something different. I should check the markets more often. I know that in myself, but I still have passionate stories where I occasionally do want to write a cowboy story, or I do want to go do a murder mystery, and I'm lucky that I have people I can reach out to for detectives to check my work or whatever it is. But I have learned that pivoting is the be all and end all of what I need to be able to do. Um, will I find a new agent since my agent retired? Probably a long time coming. I will eventually, but to me that's not important. It's keeping the stories going. Every
Mm.
writer should never have a long period of time where we're not writing, because it's very difficult to get back in the rhythm of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It is very hard to get back into it if you're away
I
from
mean,
it
I was
for so
really
long.
ill last year and I didn't do as much writing as I would have. And this year I have struggled to get back into it because it's completely destroyed all of the. For me, it's routines. Like, that's how I do
Mhm.
it. I have to
Yeah.
have a set routine with set guidelines of when, where, and how long. And I just don't have that. So I'm kind of almost rebuilding everything from the ground up. And that's really difficult. And I should know how to do this because I do this frequently because of my arthritis, but it's very difficult for me to go 9 months, 10 months, sometimes more without writing because it's an itch you can't scratch. I don't know about you, but I get like characters that just bug the crap out of me till I write it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you could be having a serious conversation with somebody, and you can be thinking about this character, and you're like, "What's wrong with me? Why can't I stay on this conversation when, ignore this stuff back here?" It's any writer should understand that.
Yeah, my process is very tortured in that way and
Yeah.
it's interesting because I'm doing Becca Syme's Write Better Faster course at the moment, and she's sort of saying, if that's how you've written 16 books, that is, you really need to go with it. And I struggle against it every single time, but I
Same.
think a lot, I research a lot, I think a lot, and I procrastinate, and then when I feel
I'm really
that
bad for that too.
I absolutely have to write the book, or it's not going to be done on time.
So
I start, but I have to sit down at the computer at the same time every day, like you. I need to, and I make myself. I get up straight away, coffee, sit at the computer, and try to write. And sometimes you have to give yourself permission just to write 100 words or a sentence. But it's building that habit, and not everybody's like that.
No.
But it's
No.
and then when I'm in the story, people will talk to me, and I'll have to ask them to repeat. My poor children, I feel sorry for them because I'm just in the story the whole time. I'll go the wrong way when I'm driving, and I'm probably really annoying to be around because I'm just in it the whole time, and so that makes me scared to enter that zone.
Yeah,
because I know that, I really have to make myself come out of it to do all the life stuff that you need to do.
Exactly. Like, I was doing the dishes the other day, and I'm writing a witch story. And it's just this sort of young teenage... She's a bit of a brat, to begin with, And she doesn't want to go home, and she doesn't want to talk to her mother. And, just all the usual teen stuff that you have. And I couldn't get the dishes done. I was just so mad because I couldn't get the piece I wanted out of my head. It was like I had the block of the words, but it was sitting there, and it was just annoying my brain. And there's been times where my best friend will actually wave her hand across my eyes because she knows I'll be like dissecting a scene, or I'll be giving her a funny look, but it's not her I'm giving the look to. It's the character that I'm thinking about. And you write better in a trance. I always said that. Like, you have to get into that mind frame of trance because that's you 100% pure to the story, to the characters.
And I listen to K-pop, strangely enough, because I don't know why, but I do when I write. And
I listen to Double Genre per story, so it's just normal,
But I know when I've been in the trance because I have missed a whole playlist of songs, and I'm up to what I started with or whatever.
You realize you're back in the beginning, and you're like,
and it's amazing how the trance happens for the same songs as well.
It does.
Yeah.
I'm really bad. Like, if I'm writing fantasy, I will play like the Vampire soundtrack, the Vampire Diaries soundtrack, or if I'm having a really bad time of writing, I might put Twilight on, or just something that kind of triggers that angsty feeling that you get in the pit of your stomach, and
the atmosphere,
and I go with it. And I think for me, it's very difficult because I can't bring my setting with me everywhere, like my mood settings I like to do. So I might make my coffee curry, write for a bit, talk to my friends from all over the world for a little hour or two, and then by that time I need to make coffee again. So I go back to the kitchen, and then something might come to me. If I'm having a good day. If I'm having a bad day, I'm swearing at the kettle, going, "God damn you, would you just give me something?" I think my neighbors think I'm crazy, because I know I've been standing at the sink at least twice swearing at something in my head and them staring back at me as if to say, is she talking to me? And I'm not. I'm really not. But it's that kind of instant where you're just away with it and you're just trying to figure out that stick or that problem that you just can't get quite by.
Yes.
Are you like me? Do you drift to one genre when you're in the bookstore? Or do you just sort of like browse?
Yeah. I tend to go for crime, actually,
Oh, okay.
in a bookstore. My recreational reading is often crime or
Yeah.
psychological thriller kinds of things. I love Lisa Gardner. I buy all of her serial killer book. Well, she used to do serial killers. She's not doing them so much anymore. But
Yeah.
I found them really gripping. And I think crime.
I must admit that's how I got into Fiona Cummings because she did The Bone Collector.
Oh yes.
And oh, not the book to read while you're lying in a hospital bed. I did. I read the whole thing in 2 weeks because I was in hospital and
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
was freaked out by the janitor in the ward because the book, I knew that the killer was a janitor for some reason really early on and it
Yeah.
freaked me out and the book out and I think I creeped the poor janitor out because kept giving him funny looks as if to say, don't trust you. um, and then I got her next one, and it just sort of snowballed from there. She's a pace writer, and
Mm.
she's just released Into the Dark, and that's a very female-heavy orientated book. I
Yeah.
didn't see the twist in that. Usually, there's like ones where I'll be like, yeah, I can see where this is going, and
Yes.
then there's other ones where I'm like, do I see where it's going? So yeah, I'm terrible because I might go crime or I might go, I've sort of done a lot of YA, but I think that's because I'm writing YA, so I'm needing to get into that headspace. But I
Mm.
tend to read whatever genre I'm reading. Usually is what I end up writing because
Yeah.
it's getting into that mind space of what's needed for that genre. Do you have that like where you need to almost set up the genre yourself?
I probably don't so much, but I do have to read, not have to, but I quote for quite a few books. So I've
Yeah,
always got a historical fiction novel that I must read to
yeah,
to give an endorsement or not, depend. I only endorse the ones I like, but
yeah.
that keeps me well supplied with historical fiction, and I find that often I'll either be reading friends' books because I do try to keep up with friends. I've got many writer friends, so
Yeah.
that is really quite a challenge. So
It
that's
is when you start
romance and
making them. Yeah, it's
yeah,
it's.
yeah, contemporary fiction, things like that. My mother-in-law is great because she reads a lot of literary fiction,
Ah,
and I tend to stay away from literary fiction because I worry that it'll be terrible. Sorry to literary writers out there, but there's some really bad literary fiction out there, and
there is.
don't want
Yeah,
to go there. So she recommends to me
the good
fabulous,
ones.
fabulous books, and
Yeah.
many of which have really stayed with me, like The Kite Runner. I think about that book, years later, I still think about that book. So I really appreciate curated literary fiction as well. I like to read widely. Probably don't read horror or
I'm
science
not a horror
fiction.
fan either.
No,
No, I
it's
struggle
just
with that one.
it's funny how I can read serial killers, but I don't like the icky, the
The gore.
horror thing. Yeah, the gore, basically. Mm.
It's the same for me. I could read like true crime or watch a true crime thing, and that's fine. But when it gets into the gore of it, I can't do it. I can't. I just no. Because to me,
No.
it's not thrilling. To me, almost I have a very hard time saying, but that's not a person. You
Right.
know, like,
Right.
or that is a person. Why are you promoting murder? You
Mm.
know, like it's almost sort of like an argument inside my mind that sort of makes me not enjoy it. So
Yeah, it's just that visceral feeling that I don't
yeah,
enjoy. Yeah.
when I this question that I'm about to ask you, I'll give you some background on it. So as readers, we all have books we don't like, and we are asking this question on this podcast to try and give reviewers and people that just enjoy reading books an understanding of the negative effects that bad reviews have on authors, particularly if you just write things like did not finish or, you know, this is terrible but no reasoning to it. And that's why when I ask this question, it's so that us as authors can almost be like, well, this is how you should deal with it, or you should, you should do it this way. And I'm hoping if we lead by example, we might get a lot of the bad behaviour that authors are experiencing with bad reviews to not happen. So the question is, has there ever been a book that you've picked up and you've wondered, like, why did I begin reading this, or I really wish I didn't start this one?
Oh, I don't like to be negative about other authors' work publicly
You don't have to
because
name it.
no,
It's just to show, you know,
yeah,
how we should approach saying we don't like a piece of work.
yes, okay. Well, I would say that I judge a lot of contests, romance writers of Australia contests,
Yeah.
and what I do see often in romance novels that don't work for me is why do these two people actually fall in love?
Yeah.
What is it about this person with this? Not that, oh, he's so hot and she's so beautiful.
Yeah.
What is it about these specific people? And I think that is not done often enough
No.
in romance novels. They're just in love because they're in this book together. You know, somebody said that about Pretty Woman. Apparently, that they fall in love because they're in this movie together. And
I think it's a bit more than that, but okay.
yeah, I think it is more than that. But I like to see, you know, if you know about writing novels, the hero and heroine, or the whatever gender you're writing, the couple need to challenge each other out of their comfort zones. You know, it's almost like the hero's journey. They need to challenge each other, push them out of their comfort zones, and help them along their character arc to be the person they always were meant to be. They see the true person underneath. And I don't see that enough with romance novels, which don't,
It's
yeah.
it's one of the things that I will take personal time out to do. Like, I will sit and say, okay, I think we'll use Ride With Me because that's an easy one for me. But for me, with me seemed like, well, Lorna could live her life without Cole, right? And that was the struggle I had, and and it bugged me because I'm detail orientated. And I said, well, why do they love each other? It can't just be more than they were high school boyfriend and sweethearts, high school couple, whatever. And I realized it was they fulfilled something within each other. It was an element that they fulfilled, whether it was Lorna had endless amount of strength, but she didn't have that one person that could love her in the way that she needed to be loved,
Yes.
and didn't drain her further of her energy and her light and her goodness. And for him, it was a case of, he comes back and life's not quite how he left it, and and he had to rediscover himself.
Mm.
You know, he's more than just the cowboy that treated horses at, you know, rodeos and conventions. He's the guy that is going to fix a family, that's going to help heal hearts and not just minds and not just animals. And the two of them together create something beautiful.
Right.
And that was the moment I was like, okay, this is a good story. This is a story that needs to be told. And it wasn't the fact that there's kids that get, you know, fostered or kids that get adopted. It wasn't the fact that there's horses being used for therapy for children with disabilities. It was much more than that. And when I stopped focusing on all the other details and I actually started to ask the bigger questions, the story started to come to me.
Yes.
And that's, to me, is what makes a good story. You know, you could have the worst editor in the world, but if you've got an amazing concept, you'll find the right home for it eventually. Not saying that editing isn't important, because it is, and I'm dyslexic, so I should know. But if it's a story that just sings, even if you are dyslexic, it can find a really good home.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you need a good storyteller first and foremost,
Yeah.
don't you, in a novel? And then the rest can be finessed, but you need that core story, or all the editing in the world isn't going to save it.
No. And I would like to find one editor at a company that I can just focus constantly on the writing. That's my dream goal, of finding somebody that, like, once I've got, like, because I'm one of these very awful people, is I start at the year and I have a notebook and I write down every idea I have, and then I work out what can I make into stories, and then I expand on it. So I would kind of almost like to have my little stack of 6 books or 8 books I'm going to write that year, or whatever it is. Hand it off to the agent. Wait to see if any of them are what she can sell or what she can home. Have it handed back, and for me to know what I can write that year. And just focus on the writing and in doing these kind of conversations with people. That would be my dream. And I envy anybody who has that. Totally envy anybody who has that. Because it's very difficult to be in an indie position where you know that you have to get up and you've got to send out one day a week is for, you know, finding the right agent, or next day is, okay, I'll look for publishers. And do you know what I mean? You've got to go down this sort of awful checklist during the week, and you don't get to just focus on the book and deadlines and stuff like that. So I admire those that have that life, and then I admire the ones that are grinding it out in the indies and who are constantly trying to change people's ideas from an indie perspective.
I totally admire indies, and I've often toyed with the idea of going indie myself or hybrid, but I do know myself fairly well, and I do like to focus on the writing, and I think I would be quite distracted by all of the business aspects. So yeah, we'll see, but I think maybe what you could do is just have little different seasons. Like you have a season where all you do is write, and then you take a couple of weeks to query your agents and publishing. I mean, that's you're looking at traditional publishing then.
I would like to get there eventually, yeah. And I think, I mean, I've had people say, you know, you've got the amazing storytelling. It's very much my dyslexia holds me back. I've had publishers that say, we won't touch you because you're dyslexic. And that wasn't traditional, that was indie. That was an independent publisher that said that. And that was actually fairly recently. So I would like to find somewhere that does not hold disabilities against a writer who wants a good story that they okay, might need a bit of spit and polish to get get it to where it needs to be, but understands that it's worth doing that to get it there, because it will make its money back with the right people behind it. And the great thing is now I have a lot of friends who, if I ever do get into that position where I can say, hey, can you guys, quote me here, or, tell me what you think, I know that they'll be honest with me. And they'll come back and they'll be like, yeah, this is really good, or I think you need to go back to the drawing board, And that, to me, even if I don't get the traditional now, I feel like I've done really well, because I have that kind of group that I know I can turn to and say, hey, do you want to check this out and see if this is something you'll put your name to as well?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very sad to hear that people won't work with you because you're dyslexic, because that is just copy editing, isn't it? I mean,
yep.
I would have thought that was the manuscripts coming to publishers in different states of readiness. You could perhaps get somebody to check your work before you hand it in. I don't really see that it should be a barrier at all.
It shouldn't be, but a lot of people, they want it almost perfect before you hand it in. And you can I work with editors off different places, and I haven't found the one that catches it, because my dyslexia it's grammar based. It's very grammar based, or I'll put in the right word, just the wrong spelling.
Yes.
So, like, it could be, I caught a cold, and I could put in, like, just the same kind of word, coughed, or, caught, just not spelled the right way. I'm very bad for there, and you are. Yeah. Those are my Achilles heel.
But then so many people.
Yeah, but then I look at it myself and I think, for somebody like me who's only got half an education, I left school with huge gaps in my education because I was sick all the time as a kid. And I've written over 10 books. I've written 3 screenplays. I have signed shopping agreements for a feature and a pilot. And I have a podcast. And I'm in my 3rd year of Open University. To me, that's a pretty good achievement set compared to where I started off.
Yeah, fantastic. Good on you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think look, maybe you just need to find a good copy editor who can work with you, and then the publisher doesn't need to know.
Exactly.
Or have you tried dictating? Because I suppose you still have to correct.
Oh, you have to correct more. Yeah. No, yeah. I learned that the hard way. Last year I had to dictate my paper, and it was awful because my brain goes faster than my mouth.
Yes.
And I have to be careful that I don't talk too fast, because then the computer doesn't pick it up.
Yes.
So I kind of had to live and learn with that. But I do sometimes, I will go into dictation mode if there's a word I can't spell, or I know the word but I just have no idea where to begin. And those things help. They do help. And I will go and I'll check. I would say my grammar, my writing is vastly better now than it's ever been. But I still have my moments of oops. So yeah, I'm aware. So moving into writing, how did you go about sort of creating the darker undertones of your story, the nail-biting moments almost?
I don't really consciously create those things, but I feel it when I'm writing. So as we were talking about the trance, I just feel it in my body, and I sort of, I don't see the book as a movie in my mind, but it is a little bit like that. I'm in the story. So I think, consciously, if you were to do that, you might slow the action down a bit and notice little details about the setting and how everybody is but it is very instinctive for me, so I can't really tell you a technique. It
For
just
me,
happens.
I'm pretty. I mean, I have to kind of be able to transport my being able to set a mood anywhere. So
Mm.
I might have candles in the house with a certain scent that will bring it to the foreground, or I'll listen to a certain kind of music, or I'll drink a certain kind of coffee, or a certain, I will add or take away things that I need to get into that mind frame. And my husband thinks it's crazy because he's like, well, what difference is this cup going to make to your writing
He's not a
work?
writer.
Yeah, like to him, it's like, huh? And I'm like, because to me, this character would choose this, or it connects me into that character. So
Yes,
that's how
yeah,
I do it, and it's very difficult if you're in the hospital. So I have to rely on music.
yes.
Um, I don't use Pinterest. There's something everybody asks me. Oh, what's your Pinterest? I sat for 2 days and I did up boards that I never looked at, and I
Mm.
have never
Oh,
used it since. I thought this
yeah.
this is not helpful in the least. It's just another procrastination form. But yeah, I will.
You
I'll.
sound like you're an auditory learner like me,
Yep.
and with a bit of tactile in there as well. So you need
Yeah.
to experience and listen. And
Yep.
I find storyboards, collages, things like that. I quite enjoy doing them, but I never
Yeah.
look at them. And
No.
my writing space is like a little cave, because the way we renovated our house, and my office ended up being at the front of the house with French doors, which is just no, because that's visual distraction for me. I see
It
people
is.
walking past, somebody comes in the gate, I'm worried somebody will come in the gate. So I ended up putting a desk in our media room, which has black walls, black curtains. So, people try to interview me uh, with a video interview, and it's like I'm the princess of darkness coming in
I
from
like that.
within. But
Yeah.
it's sensory deprivation actually works better for me. Or
I.
I
Yeah.
can work in a crowded coffee shop as long as I don't know anybody there.
Yeah,
If I,
that's my thing.
yeah,
I have to be completely anonymous.
yeah,
Or worst, I can't have somebody suddenly start talking to me in
yeah.
the coffee shop, which has happened. Like most writers know if there's a computer and somebody's typing, don't talk to them,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
But I've had young budding writers that'll come up and they'll be like, "What are you writing?"
Oh
Or
no.
"Can I buy you a coffee?" And I'm like, so I had to stop. I had to stop writing. But COVID also meant that I couldn't go and write because I was so I am immunosuppressed. So it meant that was just a no go for me.
Yeah.
So I had to try and do my writing when COVID started in my mother's house, where she is really interested in my life and interested in
Oh,
my husband. So I would try and sneak through at 6 o'clock in the morning, like, and then she would come down and it would be dead. Like I would just have dead space
yes,
because
yes.
um, and then especially like my dad would want to spend time, or my husband was really good at if he knew I was writing, he wouldn't interrupt, but he would forget to stop the rest of the family from doing it.
Mm.
So so it was hard,
Yeah.
and that's what threw me completely out of my writing style entirely, was because I had to stay with my parents. I was locked in with COVID, and I had two parents that didn't know how to entertain themselves in their house. So I had to come up with. I remember being awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, thinking, "How the hell am I going to entertain my parents?"
Yes. Oh,
And
no,
coming up with diamond
that's not right.
painting and cross stitch and
It's like having
rug making and
children.
anything I could think of that would
Yeah.
challenge them, so that I could tire them out mentally, so that they would want to go and do something else and leave me alone.
Mm.
And I
Well,
also had to
I
start
was,
writing in
yeah.
bed. But I actually made the rule recently that I don't write in bed now.
No.
because I need sort of like that divide between being in bed for sleep and sort of having a successful sleep, and then hospitalization, the difference, you know.
Yes. And it's
Because
not
last
good for
year
you either.
I had three weeks I was in, and I couldn't talk,
Oh no.
and I wrote because I couldn't sleep. I got like 3 hours a day of sleep, and I had a very noisy roommate, so I had to come up with something to do. So I rewrote one of my novels in 3 weeks. I was the only person who was lying in ICU writing at 2 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think of anything else to do, and I never knew when they were going to come. And almost the pressure of not knowing when they were going to come actually made me finish stuff.
Yes.
So
Well,
that
there you
it
go.
worked.
That worked.
It did.
Yeah.
It was a good inspiration. Yeah.
I had small children when I started writing,
Yeah.
well, publishing, and my son is very talkative. One of my sons is very talkative, and gets up very early. So I used to get up at about 3 or 4 in the morning, just so that I could get my writing done before he got up at 5 and started asking me questions. And
Yep.
once he knew I was on deadline and I needed to be left alone. And this was when I used to write at the front of the house. And he ran into my office to get a piece of paper from the printer, ran out again, ran back in to show me the sign he'd made, which was "Do not disturb."
Aw,
It
it's
was like
cute.
disturbed me twice just to make the sign. But
And I bet you stuck it up on the door so that
yeah,
people
well,
wouldn't. Yeah.
you just have to, they're little, and you have to do a bit of give and take. You
I
can't be
must
too
admit,
precious.
I am slightly terrified by the idea of having a baby and writing at the same
Oh,
time.
it's
But
brutal.
I'm also hoping that the lack of sleep, which seems to be a really good motivator for me, might actually help me finish the rest of my stuff.
Yeah, you do get
Because I might be
extremely
forced
determined.
to do it, yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
I
oh,
used to.
baby's asleep.
Mm,
you
mm,
know, just get
yeah,
it done.
that's right. You have to do it, and so you do. It's amazing.
So, what would you say drew you to this genre more than anything else? What would you put your finger on and say, that's what got me to do this?
I've just always loved history, and particularly British history for some reason. My father was a keen historian, and he used to just tell me stories about kings and queens and
Yeah.
battles and things as a child. So I really grew up with it. And it was a bit of a challenge in Australia because at the time I started writing, they did not publish European set history and historical
Oh,
fiction.
okay.
And then Kate Morton sort of took the book world by storm, and she was
Yeah.
writing these gothic sort of mystery about a house and dual timeline sort of things. So I had been writing romance, historical romance for the US market uh, at that time because I just couldn't sell anything here. I wasn't interested in Australian history. Apologies to convicts and things, but that just doesn't interest me. It just
No,
depresses me. So, and you couldn't sell convict books either. There
no.
really wasn't a lot of historical fiction coming out of Australian publishers at that time. And so I wrote 10 books for Berkeley and St Martin's Press. And then my St Martin's Press started selling the rights to my historical romance to an Australian publisher, Penguin. And I got to know the editor there, and she said, "Look, we'd really love you to write a book for us. What would you like to do?" And I said, "Well, I've got this idea for a dual timeline."
Yeah.
And so that developed there. But really, I probably would have liked to have written historical fiction from the start It was
Yeah.
just that at that stage, you know, this is in the dark ages, there was no self-publishing.
Yeah.
There was barely internet. I had internet
No, I get
at
that.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had internet at work, but not at home. And so, you know, the traditional way was the only way at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how I got into it.
To be honest, I don't think I would have, thinking back on it, I would have rather not have started in sports romance if I'd known it was an uphill battle from the get-go. Particularly trying to push wrestling up a hill to readers who've never really experienced wrestling before.
Right, right. Well, you know, Susan Elizabeth Phillips did it with her Chicago Stars, but basically there's no sport in those books.
No,
You know,
no.
because the received wisdom, whether it's true or not, was that you couldn't write about politicians, sports people, or
Yeah.
artists, I think. No.
And it was funny to me because if you look at the criteria for what romance society thinks of the romantic guy or the perfect specimen, and then you look at wrestlers, most wrestlers, they're not huge men with endless muscles. They are normally well-toned, well-developed guys who have these absolutely incredibly different personalities. And each one just, I felt like, you know, it was sad to me, oh, well, football, you know, there was so much of that, and then there was so much baseball, and so much, you know, all these different sports. And I was like, well, what about wrestlers? Like, wrestlers break necks and bones and tear ligaments and stuff. It's really awful, some of the things they do get, you know, have to go through. And I thought, well, why not go into that world and shed a little light and maybe, you know, change a little perspective. And I never thought, you know, 12 years later I would still be holding the banner up going, yeah, you know, there's stories to be told here. Open your mind. Go spend a week hanging out with a wrestler. Follow him around on his tour. You know, because they'll do maybe sort of 10 to 11 shows in a week. You know? Okay, it's only like 8 minutes or maybe 5-minute matches, but it's what they do to themselves in that 5 to 8 minute matches. A lot of the stunts is like being in a car wreck.
Yeah.
And then they're expected to go and have a drink and a shower, come back out, socialise with fans, sell their merchandise to the fans, pack up, go to the next town, do it all over again. And
is this more the is this like the MF? Oh, what is it? The WWE?
The American wrestlers, yeah, American pro wrestling.
Yeah, I would have thought there would be a market for that.
So did I.
There was a television series of female.
Heels. Yeah.
Well, was it Glow?
Glow was out, yeah. Glow was on Netflix. It did well, and I actually started writing a lot of my wrestling books sort of 11, 12 years ago. So there wasn't these shows out. It was just your WWE and your independent wrestling scenes. But saying that, I have a lot of wrestling friends, and some of them will tease me about what I've done. I get that. Do you have to sexualize us? Kind of comments, or you know,
you say, yeah,
stop living out your fantasies about us. You know, like all these sort of jokes.
Yes.
But they respect it because I've been able to lift some of the darker elements to the surface without people noticing. And it's started having that effect if people are asking questions. Things are changing. Habits are changing. The way that they're being approached and they're being handled is changing. So I think in a good way, even though I've not had a raucous bestseller or whatever, I did have a traditional... it was a traditional hybrid publisher, but I never got charged for it. What I didn't know was they took my advance from the marketing budget. and gave it to us, and that kind of crippled our entire sales idea, because Joe couldn't come over from Germany because they didn't pay for his visa ticket. And then I had to show up to all these signings with fans who were waiting for him, and of course explain, hey, sorry, Joe can't make it, it's just me, you know. And then it was also, there was times like where I had to stand to be like a car salesman and be like, hey, buy my book, you know, because nobody had done any marketing for me coming to do the signings, which was a bit awful. But I got through it, and I sold out everywhere I went, except for, I think, one store. And to me, that was success.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
with no marketing, no promotion. I did it all of myself. And I was quite proud. You know, I didn't have this big burly wrestler standing next to me going, fight, you know, intimidating every bookworm in the place, you know. But yeah, it was good. And I've learned from my journey that I enjoy writing other genres. I love wrestling. I will always love wrestling. Has a huge, safe, big place in my heart. But I do like writing crime, and I do like diving into subjects that isn't touched or hasn't been touched, because usually there's a nugget in there for me that just set my mind off. Yeah. I think that's the important thing about writing, is you're doing self-discovery as you're kind of going along. Well, you answered this question earlier, so I'm going to skip over that. That was about whether you're seeing a movie or if it was a jigsaw puzzle for you.
Yes.
Have you had a character that stayed with you the most or the longest?
One that I've written was probably from The Wife's Tale, which was partly based in 18th century Isle of Wight, and her name was Delaney, and she was based on two real women from history. One was Lady Worsley, Seymour Lady Worsley, who lived at Appledurkham on the Isle of Wight, and she was subject of a very famous, scandalous criminal conversation case. So I'm a former lawyer, and this action of criminal conversation was fascinating to me, because what it was a husband could sue his wife's lover for damages because she was his chattel, the lover had damaged the goods. So it wasn't a reciprocal suit, and it's actually still available in some American states, I believe. But so Seymour was aristocratic. She brought a big dowry to the marriage, and then the husband sued. She had many lovers, and one of the things that they proved in that case was that she had so many lovers that it, what were the damages? What were the damages? What was one person? So that was very. But the thing was that the woman never got representation. So it was between the two men. She never got to say her piece or be represented in any way, and it was just one was trying to make out that she was, in every man's bed. The other was trying to make out that she was as pure as the driven snow, because then he'd get more damages, and it was just very demeaning. And then Caroline Norton, who was actually a writer, and she had an affair with Lord Melbourne, who was Queen Victoria's Prime Minister. And, I mean, it is fairly well accepted that she actually did have the affair, but it was a politically motivated lawsuit that the husband instituted against Lord Melbourne. They were trying to bring down the government, basically. And but Caroline was quite an admirable figure. The husband was a bit of a ne'er-do-well, and he had actually condoned her affair because he wanted a preferment out of Lord Melbourne, and he was appointed a magistrate or something because of that affair, and then he turns around and sues. But anyway, so she was a writer. She earned her own money, and he abandoned her, the husband abandoned her, took her children, because men had custody of legitimate children in those days,
Yep.
and one of whom eventually died because he just parked these children with people in the country and left them, and they were just completely neglected. And I think he contracted tetanus and died, and he didn't need to have. So it was very tragic. But the thing that really got me was that the husband took all of the royalties that she earned from her books, because copyright was property and he owned the copyright in her books. And so I was so mad. I had to write a story where this woman experienced all these things and won in the end.
Yeah.
So,
it's good to right or wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. So Caroline Norton's that case was dismissed. He was found not guilty of criminal compensation. The government stayed in power, and she went on to campaign for child custody rights because she'd had such a terrible time trying to get her children back.
Of course, yeah.
And of course, one died before she could. So, yeah, that character so my character Delaney is a very strong woman. She's a writer. She goes through all of these trials, and they say that the pen is mightier than the sword, so she used her writing skills to trounce the husband. But,
and it works, you know, not everybody reads particularly men in those days didn't always read the books, so yeah, you could definitely get away with something like that. Is there a character that you wish you could have written more about? Do you have one that just sticks there?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would say Catherine Dior. I would love to know more about her experiences and write more about her, but also Sisters of the Resistance was set during World War II and shortly afterwards. I would also like to write about her later life, because she became a dealer in flowers, and she grew flowers in the south of France and supplied flowers to all of the perfume, the haute couture houses for their perfume. So I just thought, what a lovely ending to a very tragic beginning for her. And,
it would be lovely to see how she kind of gets to the next chapter in her life. And I think that's the thing about World War II, is that I think there's so much focus on the war and then a little bit of how life is after, that they almost forget that transition time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And showing them, okay, the war's been gone for a while and everyone's forgotten almost about it, and it's the aftermath of it that I think is almost to me it's more interesting, because it's how humanity goes back to that level of being a human, treating each other like humans. That I would have thought would have been interesting.
It's particularly fascinating for the French, because they wouldn't, even now I'm told they won't speak about war because of collaboration and the very, very strange position they were put in with the German occupation. And I think also people didn't want to know. All of the prisoners returned from these prison camps emaciated and unable to stomach a meal. There's a story about how Christian Dior saved up all his rations to have a souffle made for Catherine when she returned, and she could not eat it because of the just the terrible conditions she'd suffered. So but the population didn't want to know about these stories. They wanted to move on. And
they wanted to put it in the rear view. I think the attitude's changing now, where they do want to know, because we're talking several generations later now, where there's that idea of, well, what happened to my relative, or what happened there? I need to know what happened so that I could have understood their strange behaviour when I was growing up with them, or why they were a certain way. I had a lot of those questions from my grandfather because I was sick. I got to see a lot of the different changes in him. So I asked him a lot of stuff, and I know I didn't get all the real stories, but it was enlightening to me to see that he had almost rewritten the stories to make them more palatable. And I thought, to me, that was really interesting because he went through a lot, and he did a lot of things that nobody knew about. And I would have loved to have actually been able to have captured that, so his sacrifices and stuff wouldn't have been forgotten. But he wanted to just disappear into the wallpaper almost. Because to attract attention in those days was not good. Not good at all. So I can understand why they might not want to speak about it, but I do know that people are changing. Generations are changing. They do want to know now because they don't want it to happen again. You know, and it's that thing where, you know, there's a lot of fascism is on the rise as well, and we have to just sort of be a bit more aware of different things. Is there a series you are dying to write?
If I'm dying to write something, I probably will write it. So I wouldn't say that, but I have had in the back of my mind a crime series. I don't know. I've never written straight crime, so I'm not sure if I can do it, and so it might be a little side project while
I think with the way that you research and the way that you work as is, I think you would. I would recommend finding a retired detective or a retired police officer that you can personally interview and investigate and research, and sort of run your ideas by him and say, well, I would want to do this, or can you read this scene and make sure it's a bit more realistic. You know,
I've got a good friend who's a police detective, so that shouldn't be too hard.
No, there you go. And it's if you have the right support in place, you can do anything. It's about taking the running jump, I say. You know, it's about not being scared to dive off the diving board as high as you can and seeing where you land, you know. At least that's my theory. So is there any techniques that you found helpful, and are there ones that you wish that you hadn't tried?
I beg your pardon, sorry, I just didn't catch the...
Is there any writing techniques you found helpful, and are there ones you wish you hadn't tried?
Techniques. I do not plot, so...
okay.
I don't plot in detail, so I do have to write a synopsis to actually sell a book, but I try to forget it, and then so the thing I regret doing was plotting a book, every single scene of a book.
Okay, I'm not that bad, but yeah, I get where you're going with it.
But with the historical fiction, I have started to plot a little bit more because I need to get all of the historical events right in the timeline, and so I use a software program called Scrivener, which you probably know about, which allows you have a little sidebar with all the scene names in it, and it's very easy to move things around, and it's got a lot of great features. So I love that. That's something that I did try, and it was a bit of a learning curve, but once I got the hang of it, I'm sure it's got many features that I don't use, but that's been a good one for me. I think sorry.
I was going to say that I think the UK alternative to that is Final Draft. A lot of people use Final Draft.
Right.
because you can do a lot of the storyboarding in there. You can really sort of put it in there, and then you can almost like have the story here, but have the sort of the storyboard on one side and the writing on the other side. And then if you need it to drop down so you can just focus on the writing, you can. So it allows you to move everything around within the application. But it
Yeah.
also
Okay.
can help, like, if you've got you've got a collaborator or a co-author, a lot of people find that helpful because they can log in and write at the same time as you.
Oh, yes, yes.
So
I,
yeah,
yeah.
it's
That would
handy.
be disconcerting for me.
It was a bit the first time I did it. I was like, the hell's going on here? And then I was like, oh, it's my co-author, right? I thought I was being hacked or something, you know? It's like, I was almost at the point of shouting Ian to say, oh my god, I'm being hacked. But I
Yeah, I
wasn't.
saw the Duffer Brothers. I was watching a masterclass of theirs. You know, they did Stranger Things, and
Yeah,
they work that way. They just both of them work on the same document, and being
yeah.
twins, I'm sure they're just right in sync with that. But that would probably drive me nuts to do that. Maybe I'm a bit control freak.
Well, I mean, the way that we did it as co-authors was Joe and me would spend 2-3 days just arguing back and forth about the outline. And we would have an outline. And then from the outline, I would build a synopsis. And then he would tell me what he would want cut out or what he wanted added or whatever. And then I would use that to break down the chapters. So I would know, okay, this is what's happening in this chapter. And I would only know the chapters. So I wouldn't know scene by scene what it was, but I would have key notes that I had to hit. And that's how we did it. I did the lion's share of the writing, and then he would come in and he would tweak scenes like, oh, you can't have that, wrestlers don't do that, or you kidding me, if somebody did that to a wrestler, this is what they would do in response, you know. So he kind of kept me in the right zone for a lot of the ethical side of things.
Right.
And the physical side of things, which was good, and I really appreciated that sort of detail orientation he had. But yeah, I find it interesting that a lot of co-authors have many different forms of writing now compared to what, you know, because in the old days you'd have to be in the same room as each other if you wanted to co-author something, or you would have to be meeting up somewhere to do it. And yeah, so I'm kind of grateful for technology in that regard, because me and Joe would never have written Marie's World or any of the Marie's World series because it would have been impossible for us to do. So yeah, I was grateful for that, and he got used to me kind of texting him at random times in the night, going, "Oh, got an idea," which you know, if you work with me, you know that I have the ability to do sometimes. So going into the live portion of the podcast, what's the first thing you do when you want to de-stress from editing and writing?
I watch K-dramas, Korean dramas. So,
Okay.
well, it was a habit I developed in COVID when I was
Yeah.
feeling quite stressed about many things.
I
I
think
was
we
going
all
through
were,
a
yeah.
divorce as well, yeah. So, yeah, just something that completely took my mind off everything else was these romantic comedies, and I just love them. But you
Yeah.
know, something that's good to do is go for a walk or get in the garden and pull weeds or something like that too to de-stress. I think going
That's a really
outside is
good
always a
one,
good
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
What hobbies do you enjoy, and are there ones you wish you could explore?
Oh, look, you know, I feel like there's no time for hobbies really. I like cooking. I bake a bit too much for my waistline. And yeah,
I don't bake enough for my waistline, so.
I wish I was like that. I do like to draw, and I think what I would love to do one day, but I still haven't got around to it, is learn to paint.
Oh wow,
Because
yeah.
in my family it was always, oh, we're not artistic, we're not creative, and when I actually put my mind to things, I can sometimes do them. So, but I think there is that barrier there that I haven't got there yet because I'm worried I won't be very good.
It's all about taking that leap of faith, isn't it? Really,
Yeah, and having the time too. I mean, I think you need a lot of patience, which I don't have an awful lot of, to be honest.
So, I myself have an illness that makes me slow down and appreciate the day. What makes you slow down and smell the roses?
I think being with my friends and family, I really do try to live in the moment and pay attention to what they're saying and not be off with the fairies with my stories. So yeah, when the kids are on holidays and things like that, depending on my deadlines, I do try. Yeah, at least it used to be I would work from 4 a.m. till 11 a.m. something like that, and then the afternoon was theirs. So and going for a swim and just getting outdoors with them, that's really
important things. Yeah. Where's your favorite place to curl up during the day? Do you like going into your garden? Do you have a reader's nook? Where do you like to just go and read?
Well, living in Queensland, we love our verandas. So I've got a nice big veranda, and I often go out there and sit and just pretend I'm out in nature and I am, but I'm in suburbia. So,
It counts.
Yeah, enjoy the fresh air and I love sitting out there and reading a paper book. Feels like luxury.
It does a bit. So we are on the last part of the podcast, which is the funnest bit, where we're going to do a speed round of the first book that comes to your mind. And when I looked you up, I had to try and imagine where we might meet, and I thought of a clandestine mission in an old man's club in England, in London somewhere. So your first word is stones.
Stones. Oh, The Dry by Jane Harper. It's very rocky and stony. Yep.
Beach.
Big Little Lies, Liane Moriarty.
Okay. Groomsman.
I'll have to say a friend's book, The Paris Wedding by Charlotte Nash. She's an Australian writer.
Ooh, cool. How about gown? Like gowns, women's gowns.
Dior and I by Christian Dior. That's a fabulous memoir of his first collection. I really love that book.
Okay. Interesting. Crowns.
Macbeth.
Okay. Necklaces.
Cartier, the story of the Cartiers. I've just read that because I'm writing about a woman who designs jewellery now, so yes.
Okay, servants.
Much Obliged Youths by P.G. Woodhouse.
Okay.
Which I have not read for many years, but it's on my bookshelf.
It counts. Fires.
There's a book called Northern Heat by Elaine Young about the bushfires in Australia.
Yeah, you guys had it bad a wee while ago. Fireplaces.
The Talisman Ring by Georgette Heyer. Yeah. There's a tricky fireplace in that book.
Last but not least, stone floors.
Outlander by Diana Gabaldon.
I knew that one was coming for some reason. I just had that. Yeah, I had that feeling. Well, it has been an honour to have you on, and you will have to come back in autumn so we can talk about your new book.
Thank you
and the great
much,
thing is,
Crystal.
I will have a whole list of questions for the book, just like
Lovely.
discussing the whole world and everything. Now that the listeners have met you and gotten to know you, you don't have to go through the ridiculous questions all over again. And it'll be a bit more fun. So, yes, we are excited to have you back. And guys are going to want to stay with me for next week as we have a fantastic US author who is going to be making an appearance on the show.